But before we get into the draft, I want to kind of take it step by step with you. Let's just start with how, the off season kind of kicked off, right? Especially free agency. I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles made a lot of moves. Saquon Barkley, Bryce Huff, GJ comes back, Devin White, cut Avonte Maddox, but they brought him back. Added to the wide receiver room and Devontae Parker, Paris Campbell. They added some more linebackers as well, Zach Bond, Oren Burks. I can go on and on, right? But let's just start here. What's been your overall perspective on how the Philadelphia Eagles have approached their offseason?
The typical Eagles mindset, with the exception of Saquon Barkley, right? That's the outlier. So that was where they went a little bit off script. And we'll see how it works out. Everybody's excited about it. He's one of those guys who I talk about all the time. You hear the players talk about him with reverence. I don't think anybody questions his skill set. I've questioned the fit. I continue to question the fit. I don't understand it a little bit, but from a perspective of just pure talent, he's got that. It's never manifested himself. So, a lot of people point to the context with the New York Giants, and rightfully so. It's fair to point out that their poor quarterback play over the years, their poor offensive line play. But I got to tell you, somebody who covered Adrian Peterson in his prime, those guys that are different, they find a way. They find a way. And I haven't seen that with Saquon. So a little bit of a concern with that. But we'll see. This will be the best supporting cast. And I'm not sure he can reach the expectations simply because the expectations seem to be set so high. Everything else has been a typical Eagles offseason, including Haason Reddick. That he's going to be 30, and that's what the Eagles do, right? They try to thread that needle. So they got younger with Bryce Huff. They got for 3 years, essentially 17 million. So he's more cost effective. You think you have the longer shelf life, and we'll see. That's a delicate balancing act, especially because I think Hassan's going to have a better year in with the Jets. The Jets have a very talented defense. He's still got plenty left in the tank, but do you want to pay him upwards over 20 million a year in the long term? And the Eagles essentially said, we don't. We want to try to thread that needle. We'll see if it works out. Everything else, yeah, typical Eagles, the way they do business. Notable exception being Saquon Barkley, as I said. And I go back to Christian McCaffrey, really. They're trying to duplicate or come as close to duplicating what Christian McCaffrey brought to the 49ers. And they're a little envious of that. And, there's only one Christian McCaffrey. I say it constantly.
It's funny, right? Staying on the Bryce Huff, Haason Reddick dynamic. That's something that always intrigued me because me personally, to your point, I understand the Philadelphia Eagles perspective, right? And trying to thread that needle. I just think a guy like Haason Reddick, with the level of production he provides you and the amount of snaps he's able to eat up, one of the things that, just to bring the baseball for a brief moment, one of the things people love about Aaron Nola is the fact that he eats up innings, right, for the Phillies. That's one of his biggest traits. When it comes to Haason Reddick, he eats up a lot of snaps. He's a high volume guy. His motor runs hot at all times. He's one of the best closers in the league. And the Philadelphia Eagles still felt like that wasn't enough, and they wanted to hedge their bet to a guy like Bryce Huff, who young, ascending, coming off of a career year, but he wasn't undrafted. He was an undrafted guy, which doesn't mean much in the NFL. Guys that are undrafted become Hall of Famers, right? Yeah. But what concerns
John
me,
Randall covered one of them. Yeah.
Yes. So what concerns me the most about Bryce Huff, and I want to get your spin on this. He's only at most played 42% of the defensive snaps when he was with the Jets. And with the Eagles, one of the biggest issues on defense was that people ran out of gas. Jordan Davis, the motor, wasn't there on the back end. Jalen Carter, rookie, but the motor wasn't there. Josh Sweat ran out of gas on the back end. What's to say Bryce Huff, because he hasn't been as prominent. He hasn't been in as prominent as a role that he's going to be in Philadelphia. Who's to say that he won't run out of gas again? What's your thoughts on that perspective?
Well, that's part of the same needle thread. And I think the Eagles look at it from the opposite perspective as they ran Haason Reddick into the ground over the past 2 years. So that's part of it as well.
Mm.
The wear and tear, 900 plus snaps for 2 consecutive years, deep playoff run. They made the playoffs again. So he's played a lot of football over his 2 years in Philadelphia. And that contributes to the idea, okay, he's going to be 30 in September. If you got to sign him to an extension at 20 million plus, you're talking about 32. Is he going to be the same at 32? Very, very unlikely as you continue that wear and tear. And you're betting on a young player who hasn't played much, and that's part of it. The trick to this whole thing is evaluation of the future, not looking in the rear view mirror, because if you just look in the rear view mirror, Hassan's a better player, right? But this league moves very, very quickly. And if you want to look at cornerback, James Bradbury's a second team all pro. Now they can't wait to run him out of town in 1 year, in a calendar year. At 32, what's Haason Reddick going to be? So that's part of what you're trying to do. And that's part of the ugly part of it. You don't pay guys for what they did. You pay them for what you think they're going to do. And they think Bryce Huff is going to be a really good player for a longer shelf life than Haason Reddick at this stage. And if they're wrong, they'll get lambasted for it. But that's what they're betting. That's what they're telling you. This guy's an ascending player, Bryce Huff, and Haason Reddick, they believe, is a descending player. And we'll see if they're right. But the old adage in sports is it's better to give up on a player a year early than a year late. And that's what they're betting on Haason Reddick. I think they understand he's got a year or two left, but they didn't want to go above that. And let's be honest, Hassan wanted 25 million.
Okay, I'm glad you went there. I was curious. I'm glad you went there, John, really quickly, because I'm curious. I was curious the entire time about what in particular could he be asking for? What number are the Philadelphia Eagles not trying to move off of? And me personally, to your point, I've always felt to myself, he has to be looking for something between 23 and 25 million.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't blame him. He's one of 2 players with double-digit sacks in 4 consecutive seasons. So I don't blame Haason Reddick at all.
Agreed.
He's trying to get top of the line money, and maybe he gets it from the Jets, maybe he doesn't. But from the Eagles' perspective, understand they're in a different situation than the Jets, and I think a lot of fans don't understand that. Haason Reddick produced for them. Haason Reddick played at a high level for them. Haason Reddick was one of the best defensive players in the league for them in the 2022 season. He had an historic year. It was one of the best defensive years in Eagles history. He wrecked the NFC Championship game. He did all that for the Philadelphia Eagles. He didn't do it for the New York Jets. So there's a level of expectation from the Eagles that isn't there from the Jets. And by that, I mean, and you see this all the time in the NFL, guys who have to take aging players who have to take salary cuts. They don't like to do it with the team they performed with. They'll do it. They'll go somewhere else and take less money, but they won't do it for the team that they performed with. It's sort of a human nature disrespect thing. Like, I did this for you, and you're telling me, Bryce Huff is going to come in and make more money than me. That's essentially where the Eagles were, because Hassan's only making $14.5 million this year, whatever the number is. And I imagine the Jets will get something done at some point. But there was no way you could say to him, and I had that discussion with our old buddy Jody Mack all the time. He's like, make him play out his contract. I'm like, you can't do that. He's going to be miserable. And you don't want a miserable play. You can't bring Haason Reddick back with the Philadelphia Eagles at less money than Bryce Huff. Can't do it. So the number you have to rework something out. And I think if the Eagles, could have gotten him to agree to 18 million, maybe he's here. And once they signed Bryce up, it became all right. Josh Sweat, Haason Reddick, one of you is going to be gone. So basically, whoever agrees to the team-friendly deal first is going to be back, and that was Josh Sweat.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny to me. I've always felt like, and this will be my last point on Haason Reddick situation. I've always felt like the Philadelphia Eagles kind of made their intentions very clear when it came to Haason Reddick earlier on, even after the historic season that you mentioned. They drafted Nolan Smith, and then this offseason, they bring back BG. They gave him money. They gave Josh Sweat money, and then they gave Bryce Huff money. So I feel like they've kind of showed their hand little by little that, hey, Hassan, we like you, but don't think we're afraid to pull the trigger on you.
Well, Nolan Smith's a big part of this as well, because Howie talked about it, and he said at the combine, he said, Nolan probably should have played a little bit more last year, or they would have liked him to play a little bit more. And I know a lot of people have turned the page, but the organization hasn't turned the page on Nolan Smith, and they want to get him on the field. So it became, a lot of people make the obvious comparisons, and we just talked about it with Bryce Huff. Bryce was going to play anyway. If Haason Reddick was back, Bryce Huff was going to play a lot. Nolan Smith is not. If Haason Reddick is back, so that's part of it as well. And a lot of this has to do with the combination of Bryce Huff and Nolan Smith more than just one or the other.